Chapter 10. Iron's Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Iron's Plan. I see, so you summoned us in order to. Yes, now go, get ready for what is about to begin. With the strength of this planet, I doubt it will fall. Once one of you transcends, you will be welcomed in the order. Until then, we will have minimal interference with your planet. The tall man cut off the Empress and she simply bowed slightly at him before all five were sent back. Master, they have potential. I believe that this planet will give us some good fighters. The red-headed man spoke as the tall one nodded in agreement. Yes, those five are talented enough to reach sainthood. Even in the future they might become your peers. Until then, we need to contact the order and get things moving. The system will integrate itself with the planet at any moment. The two nod at the tall man before he tears a hole in the void once more and they leave. As for the sea of light that was around them, it slowly started flowing down to the planet. A change was about to occur. The five had returned back to where they came from and took action. The Empress immediately gathered all the people in the castle, which was easy since most of the nobles of the vampire race were already present. The Emperor called for a meeting immediately after his return. He reassured his wife that everything was all right and that he would explain everything during the meeting. The other three did the same. The Dragon King called his brethren to explain what was about to happen. The Lord of the Dead Sea gathered all the powerful sea creatures and the Lord of the Elves called for all the tribes to quickly gather. The five were the most powerful and influential figures in Corleone. Their every action was closely monitored by the other powerful organizations and figures in the world. The spies that were planted all sent back word of what was happening, making the organizations wary as all five had suddenly moved to action. Back in the Golden Knight Empire, in the city of Duke Orsted, a figure suddenly jumped from a window that was located on the second floor. He quickly used a whip to grab onto a nearby house and propelled himself forward before dashing through the streets. Not long after the figure appeared, another came out of the window as well. A frail old man came out and floated in the air, observing the surrounding area in order to find Lyle. He looked around before smirking and lifting his hand. A drop of blood appeared above it. You almost had it. If you hadn't gotten injured, you would have succeeded in leaving this place alive. Unfortunately for you, you failed. Forbidden art. Blood sensing. The blood above the old archmage's hand vibrated before it slowly floated down to the back of his hand. The blood suddenly fused with the hand and became a small tattoo of an arrow. The tattoo wasn't stationary, however. The arrow pointed at where the owner of the blood was, and once the spell had been used, the old archmage could locate the person as long as they were not further away than 10 kilometers from him. Iron smirked as he started flying towards Lyle, only to suddenly stop in his tracks. No, I can't do it in the city. I have to make him leave the city first before I deal with him. The archmage suddenly moved left from where Lyle was and rose a bit higher in the air. The brat is dead. Those bastards have betrayed us. I have to leave this empire quickly, but first I need to deal with that brat. He knows too much about me and my abilities to be left alive. The old mage thought before suddenly casting a spell. Close down the gates. His voice thundered in the city as everybody was able to hear him. The spell he used was a simple voice amplifying spell that had been further enhanced by the mage after he reached a high enough understanding of the laws of space. The Duke has been assassinated. Nobody is to enter or leave the city before the assassin is found. His words shocked the people as the guards that had been posted at the 4 gates moved. They knew that for a person to speak with such a voice was thanks to a spell, and nobody in the city, except for the old archmage who was always by the Duke's side, could do such a thing. If they were wrong, they would simply be reprimanded by their officers, but if they failed to do something that had been ordered by the old archmage, they would be flogged to death. I know that a person of your skills will be able to get out even with me putting the city under lockdown, and you will have no choice since staying in the city after it has been completely closed is the same as signing a death warrant in such a situation. The old archmage smirked as he floated down to a roof of a house and waited. He could sense how far away a person was with his spell and would know when Lyle had left the city. which meant he could now only wait until that happened. On the streets of the city, people came out of the bars and brothels in a stupor before running back home. Those that had been asleep were woken up by Iron's shout and scrambled to open the windows and check what was happening. The sleeping city was awake, and everybody was incredibly tense. The guards would definitely investigate every nook and cranny of the city, which meant that those that had illegal things in their houses were now scrambling to find a way to get rid of them. For one group in the city streets, however, the situation was different. A company of soldiers had previously entered the city under the guise of being merchants. They were the ones that were supposed to take control of the castle after the Duke's death. "Commander, what should we do? We rushed to the castle. I don't know why that old bastard would inform everybody about Orsted's passing, but we need to act fast," a man with long brown hair said as the soldiers simply nodded at him. There were over 100 soldiers that were a part of the company and they all quickly went to get their armor and weapons. They had only expected to move after the assassin would give them a sign that the Duke was dead, but there was no need to wait for him now. "What about the mage?" a soldier asked. "He will be at the castle, or in the city. We don't need to look hard to find him. He put the whole city under lockdown, so it will be easy to locate him later. Taking control over the castle takes precedence now." The soldiers all nodded and in a mere 5 minutes were all standing in front of the commander in their full gear. The company moved and rushed to the castle. The people were shocked to see them as they wore the crest of the royal family and not the Duke's crest. The soldiers under the royal family were unlike any others. They commanded great respect and power and were untouchable by others. It only took them 5 more minutes before they were in front of the castle gates. Upon seeing the crest of the royal family, the guards hurriedly bowed and opened the gates while the company quickly moved through the floors. None of the guards that were present in the castle dared stop them. Some were still full of adrenaline over what had transpired and even drew their weapons out, only to throw them on the ground fearfully upon realizing who the soldiers were. Even the death guards dared not stand in the way of the company. Their equipment was great compared to others, but when put against the royal family's soldiers, they paled in comparison in both equipment and strength. A mere 15 minutes was all it took for the company to take control of the castle. The ministers and other higher-ups paled at the sight of the soldiers and simply sat in their rooms, fully knowing what was about to transpire. As for Lyle, he was right at the wall that surrounded the city. His Blood Knight form was still active, although he only had a couple of more minutes before it ended. His body was injured, and even though he was miles ahead of the guards of the castle, their sheer numbers had made it impossible to escape uninjured. The wounds were light, however, and he would quickly recover. For now, they didn't inhibit any of his movements or his fighting capabilities, so there was no need to treat them. He didn't know why Iron had locked the city down, but if the mage really did believe that he was the only way he could stop him, he was dearly mistaken. Lyle quickly scaled the wall with incredible speed before reaching the top. Even though soldiers patrolled the top of the wall, they were sparse and it was impossible for them to stop him. He transformed his 2 blood daggers into a whip that had a spiked end. He stabbed the spiked end into the top of the wall before jumping down and using the whip as a rope. In a mere 5 seconds, he was down on the ground and simply glanced up the 12-meter tall wall before smirking and running towards the forest. Inside the city, on top of a roof, the mage Iron opened his eyes and flashed a dangerous smile as he stared in the direction Lyle had gone to. The forest, perfect. Chapter 11. Iron's True Identity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 11. Iron's true identity. Lyle quickly ran through the forest. Since it was so close to the city, there were no powerful monsters inside of it, merely some normal animals that the hunters could hunt in order to get meat and leather, while deeper inside the forest one could find some weak monsters that were used by the Adventurers Guild to train the newbies. Rarely would stronger monsters appear, but when they did, they would be quickly hunted down by the adventurers before they could kill people. Of course, there would always be some casualties. Some unfortunate newbie would get slaughtered by the monster, or a hunter would disappear, but that was a risk that they knew existed every time they went into the forest. The lush trees made for a great cover for Lyle. The moonlight was barely able to penetrate through the canopy of the trees and made the inside of the forest dark, and most would struggle with their sight. For Lyle, however, it was no problem. As a vampire, he was a creature of the night. They preferred being active at night and had night vision, which made the forest a perfect place for him. He didn't know whether the old archmage was still looking for him, but even if he was, he wouldn't be able to find him inside the forest. Flying above the forest in order to locate Lyle was almost impossible, and going inside was even worse for the old archmage, at least that was what Lyle thought. The reality was that the Iron was following him from about 200 meters away. The forest spanned tens of kilometers, 1 mile equals 1.6 kilometers, and Lyle had already gone deep inside of it. His speed was incredible as he didn't slow down at all, wanting to get as far away from the city as possible. Iron was still not ready to attack him. Even though they were already about 2 kilometers away from the city, there was still a chance that some people were nearby, and even though the chance of that happening was almost zero, Iron didn't want to take even the smallest risk right now. He wouldn't lose Lyle's trace, that much was certain, so he didn't mind waiting a bit more before attacking him. He thought of what he should do. Should he simply attack the young assassin from above when he was unaware of his existence, or should he appear before him and let him squirm for a while? He knew that taking care of Lyle quickly was the best course of action, but he was angered by the assassin that had killed Orsted and foiled his plans. Whoever gave the information about Orsted betraying the Empire was not a member of his kingdom, as he would have been informed about it before, which made it clear that he couldn't continue being active here and had to go back to his kingdom soon. The assassin was simply a tool that the enemy had used, but Iron still felt irritated by him. He didn't want to give Lyle a quick death but wanted to torture him and make him suffer before ending him. Lyle was completely unaware that Iron had gotten a drop of his blood and that he was using it to track him. Even though Lyle's ability was manipulating blood, he could only do it in a certain radius. All the blood that was more than 50 meters away from him can't be sensed. As long as Iron kept his distance, Lyle would be completely unaware that he was being tracked. Even if Iron was to get close to Lyle, the latter would still be unable to sense the blood since Iron had used it for the spell. Lyle ran fast as he wanted to get as far as possible from the city before his transformation ended. After that, his power would drop and he would be completely unable to do anything against the Archmage. Even though he was fairly certain that he was already safe, as an assassin he was taught that being cautious was something that he should never forget. No matter how good something looked like, one should be as cautious as possible when dealing with anything. As Lyle got some 3 kilometers away from the city, Iron made his move. His speed was suddenly increased by 3-fold as he quickly overtook Lyle before dropping down and standing in the air in front of him. Seeing in the dark was not a problem for the old Archmage, as a simple spell was enough to give him night vision. Upon seeing Iron, Lyle stopped running and started at him in shock. He didn't know how the old Archmage was able to get here. He was certain that he had created more than enough distance between them previously. Upon staring at the old mage, he noticed the arrow on the back of his hand that was pointing straight at him. A spell. Correct, I have to praise you, you almost managed to escape, almost, Iron said as he stared at Lyle with a smirk on his face. But now it is time to end this little game of cat and mouse, Iron said as he spread his arms open. A green gas suddenly started being released from his body as Lyle stared in shock. The grass and plants near Iron started withering as even the trees showed signs of being corroded by the gas. The sight made alarm bells ring in Lyle's head as he suddenly ran to the side. Poison, his mastery is in poison, damn it. Mages that mastered the art of poison were rare, incredibly rare. They were usually ostracized from society as any of their spells would always cause many casualties. Poison didn't discriminate against friends and foes, and those that fought against a poison mage or fought together with him both had to be incredibly careful to not fall to his poison. Of course, such mages usually had antidotes to their poison that they would hand out to their allies, but the damage they would deal to the surroundings was also something that most kingdoms and empires disliked. To find a poison archmage was rare as they were mostly members of underground societies that didn't care for the lives of the innocent. Seeing the poison made Lyle think of a person. There existed only one known poison archmage in the surrounding area, and he belonged to a kingdom that was part of the alliance that went against the Empire. How Orsted managed to poison the Duke so easily was now easy to imagine. With a poison archmage by his side, the Duke wouldn't have suspected a thing. I doubt that I can survive. I need to at least find a way to leave a message to the organization. They need to know Iron's true identity. Lyle thought as he ran with all of his might, only for Iron to once again appear in front of him. He pointed his hand and a small cloud of poison was sent at Lyle's way, who didn't have enough time to dodge. The poison cloud hit him and he simply passed through it. He didn't inhale any of the poison, but it didn't matter. The poison spells of archmages could get inside the body by entering through the pores, and there was almost no way of blocking it. One would have to be at the same level as the archmage in order to use mana to block the poison or suppress it when it entered the body, and unfortunately for him, Lyle was not at the same level. Don't worry, that poison is not a lethal one, it will simply weaken you for a day. I still have a lot I want to do to you before killing you. Who knows, if you behave properly, I might even give you the antidote, Iron said as he touched his spatial ring and showed a small vial to Lyle. Whether the antidote was real or not was something that Lyle had no idea of, but looking at how the archmage was behaving, and the complete control he had over the situation, he had no reason to not believe his words. Lyle stared at the old man who was smiling at him before suddenly jumping to the side. A deep cut appeared on the ground he previously stood on and sweat started covering his head. The poison was already working. Thanks to Lyle's ability to control blood, he could actually lessen its power since Iron had underestimated him by not knowing his ability and used a weak poison on him. Now, don't move. Like I said before, if you behave, I might give you the antidote and let you live. I don't have anything to gain by killing you. Humph. You can keep your words to yourself, Magister Ilya, Lyle said as he stared at the old mage whose eyes constricted a bit. Ilya. The Magister of a kingdom, the main figurehead amongst all the mages of the kingdom. He was counted as one of the most powerful and dangerous mages in the surrounding area. Many years ago, the Empire, together with the neighboring kingdoms, decided to get rid of him. He was after all too big of a threat to them as his poison magic could change the outcome of battles, no matter how large they were. Over 10 archmages had gathered and attacked the Magister during a conference, and out of the 10, only 6 survived, the others had fallen to the powerful poison. Everybody believed he was dead, but the old mage somehow survived, disguised himself, and joined the Empire. Ah, so you have figured out my identity. That is too bad. Now I really need to kill you. You would have killed me anyway, there's no need to try and fool me. I see, well then, I guess I should end this. The old archmage said as he lifted his hand. An incredible amount of mana was suddenly drawn to the man. If somebody was to look at the forest from above, they would be able to see the mana forming a vortex as it got drawn in by Ilya. Farewell, young assassin, Ilya said as he brought his hand down at Lyle. And nothing happened. The vortex of mana suddenly dispersed, and the archmage was brought down to the ground as the spell he used in order to float was gone. The system has begun integrating with the planet named Corleon. Chapter 12. The system's arrival. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 12. The system's arrival. System, what the hell is that? Ilya asked as he looked around him in shock. What just happened? Why did the mana around me suddenly change? Wait, what is happening? The old mage shouted as he sensed mana around him. It was increasing. It was increasing at a visible rate. In mere seconds the amount and quality of mana had almost doubled, and it was still continuing. The system is integrating with the planet. Mana will be spiraling out of control for 5 minutes before calming down. Attention to the inhabitants of the world, nobody will be able to use mana for the 5 minutes mentioned. Both Lyle and Ilya stared in wonder as they heard the words that echoed in their heads. It wasn't only them, the same thing was happening in the whole world. A hunter was gathering the little mana he had in order to kill a tiger that he had been hunting. only to lose control over the mana and subsequently get killed. A mage and knight were having a life-and-death duel. Right as the mage was about to block the knight's sword with a spell, he was shocked to find out that he couldn't cast the spell and was penetrated by the sword. Only the 5 that had previously been kidnapped and brought in front of the tall man were not surprised, as were the people that were with them. They had previously explained everything to them and already started taking action. From what the tall man had told them, monsters would rise in strength and all intelligent life on the planet would be in danger. Many would lose their powers or be weakened after the system integrated itself with the planet, and even they would become weaker than usual. The Dragon King and the Lord of the Dead Sea were partly considered monsters, but they would also become weakened compared to other, wild ones. In the void outside the planet, many light years away, the tall man suddenly stopped and looked back. Master. The system has started the integration. Those 5 will definitely be alright, each one is a tier 7 being, and this planet will definitely produce at least one transcendent. The red-headed man said as both the girl and tall man nodded their heads before continuing on their way. Back on Corleone. Lyle stared at the mage before getting up from the ground. I don't know what is happening, but you can't use mana, can you? Ilya stared at Lyle in horror as he realized that the two had switched roles. Lyle was previously completely at his mercy, but without mana, the old archmage couldn't even use his spatial ring right now and could do nothing to him. Lyle's daggers turned into the blood while his armor disappeared. I see, even this is considered using mana, huh? Lyle whispered as he glanced at his hands. Even though he didn't need to use mana to draw in blood, the ability would still draw the mana from the surroundings by itself and the daggers had traces of mana inside of them. Everything had mana inside of it, no matter how weak and insignificant it was. But my transformation is still active, that's good, Lyle said as his nails suddenly grew a bit longer. As a vampire, he didn't need to use weapons in order to kill somebody. His nails were as sharp as razors, while his fangs could penetrate through steel. He stared at the old mage as the latter panicked. He was physically weak, even back when he was in his prime. His physical strength was nothing special, but after barely surviving the attack all those years ago, he managed to fake his own death but was gravely injured. His current appearance was because of those injuries. His body was incredibly frail, but as a mage, his body was something that didn't matter, as long as he could use mana, he could do anything he wanted to do. Sorry, no hard feelings, you did try to kill me first, Lyle said as he grabbed the old mage by the neck. He pulled his right hand back before plunging it deep inside the man's chest and penetrating his heart. His hand didn't stop, however, but it continued until it came out of the old man's back. This should be enough, but, just in case, Lyle said before squeezing the mage's neck and breaking it. He let go of the dead body before using his 2 middle fingers and stabbing them deep inside the eye sockets, penetrating the brain and destroying it. One can never be too safe, Lyle said as he looked at the body of the dead mage. This was the most dangerous mission he had ever taken, and the one where he was certain he would die. He didn't know what happened, and he didn't understand what the system was and how it was integrating with the planet itself, but he did know one thing, it saved him this time. Without mana suddenly spiraling out of control, he would have never been able to kill Ilya with such ease, hell, he would never have been able to injure the old man, not to mention kill him. The system integrating with the planet will increase the mana it produced, all unintelligent life on the planet will find themselves growing stronger with incredible speed, and some will gain intelligence as well. The words of the system were suddenly heard inside Lyle's head again. To all the intelligent life on the planet, brace yourselves, the increase in mana is both a good and bad thing, most will find their strength becoming lower, but reaching the same level of power will be easier, as will becoming even stronger. The system will help you with that, please stay calm and wait until the integration is complete. The host, Lyle, is advised to stay next to the body until the system has finished integrating. A different, gentle voice suddenly said to Lyle, whose eyes widened in shock as he looked around him. Who is it? I am the voice of the system, one of many, Please stay calm and wait until the integration is finished, the improvement of the host's bloodline is at stake. Lyle stared at the body of Ilya in shock as he heard the voice. Improvement of my bloodline, what the hell does that mean? The system will explain everything after integration is complete. Lyle once again widened his eyes as he heard the voice. Not only could the existence that was called the system speak directly to his mind, but it could hear his thoughts as well. Lyle was suddenly at an impasse. What should he do? Should he wait as the voice had suggested, or should he just run and get the hell out of there? He thought for a bit before sitting down and leaning against a nearby tree. From what the voice had said, only 5 minutes were needed for the integration, and 3 had already passed. Waiting for 2 more minutes was nothing. After 2 minutes had passed, the whole world could once again hear the system. Integration is complete, the planet Corleone has been integrated by the system. To all the inhabitants, welcome to the system. The system has completed a scan of the host, a powerful bloodline has been found in the body. The host can improve the bloodline and has already done all the prerequisites that were needed. The host merely needs to consume the blood of a tier 4 being in order to improve the bloodline. Warning, the host's power is currently too weak to handle the power of the improved bloodline. The host will have to sacrifice the current level he is in to improve the bloodline. The bloodline will also be partially sealed until the host reaches tier 6 and can handle to the full power of the bloodline. I will lose all my powers, and what even is tier 6, what is a tier 4 being? The body next to you is a tier 4 being, a previously injured, and now dead tier 4 being, but a tier 4 being nonetheless. So, I have to consume his blood. Are you kidding me? No, I won't do it. The improvement of one's bloodline is extremely hard to come by, the host should reconsider. I will not drink blood, no blood, especially not human blood. Lyle shouted in anger as the system was quiet. Improving the bloodline will also allow the host to not only become vastly more powerful in the future but also find the person you are looking for. Lyle suddenly opened his eyes wide in shock as he heard the system's words. What did you say? Improving the bloodline will also allow the host to not only become vastly more powerful in the future but also find the person you are looking for. My bloodline, will improving it really help me track down that man? Lyle asked himself as he stared at the dead body of Ilya. Correct, once the player reaches a higher tier, he will be able to find the person. Damn it! Lyle shouted as he neared the body. Damn it, damn it, damn it, I don't want to, but I have to find him, no matter what, Lyle said as he opened his mouth before biting deep inside the neck of Ilya. Chapter 13. Bloodline Evolution. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sound of slurping could be heard as Lyle started drinking the blood of the dead Ilya. The body of the Archmage had lost a fair amount of blood, but he was still able to get some from biting the carotid artery. He only drank for a couple of seconds before there was no more blood. He rose and stared at the body, aware that this was not enough to satisfy the requirement for improving his bloodline. He clicked his tongue before burying his face in the hole he had created in the old man's chest. The sound of slurping continued as he drank all the blood he could. Lyle's long black hair suddenly became a bit shorter as the wisps of red disappeared. His eyes lost their previous shine as the transformation had ended. He, however, was unaware of it. He was completely engrossed in drinking all the blood he could. Vampires in this world drank blood, but only those that possessed a low-ranked bloodline had to consume blood to survive. The higher-ranked vampires didn't need to do such things, but they still had urges and found it a bit difficult to control themselves when an opportunity presented itself. Only the noble vampires had complete control over their own urges. Drinking blood for them was the same as dessert. Drinking the blood of powerful beings would increase their strength, and rarely ever would a noble vampire go on a rampage in order to find blood, although those cases existed. Vlad the Cruel was a prime example. A noble vampire that loved drinking blood so much that in the end, he lost control. As one of the most powerful noble vampires, he stood at the top of the food chain and destroyed many towns, and even attacked cities and powerful monsters in order to satisfy his lust for blood. It was only after multiple empires, together with the other noble vampire houses, had allied themselves that he was stopped. He had drank so much blood that his power had risen to incredible heights, and defeating him took over 100 people who were once at the same level as he was. Most vampires would only drink the blood of their enemies, while there were those that would form a contract with humans or other beings that were willing to give their blood in return for power. Those beings would become adjutants, powerful beings that served the vampire they had formed a contract with. They were very powerful and could inherit a part of the vampire's power through the contract. Even though the event happened hundreds of years ago, it created a large rift between the vampires and the rest of the world. Most kingdoms and empires prohibited the existence of vampires in their territory, but none dared attack the vampires as their strength was incredible. Lyle had never drunk blood before. As someone that possessed a noble bloodline, he had no need for it, and since he was half-human, he resented the very idea of ever doing such a thing, even though it would benefit him and increase his strength. He felt that if he started drinking blood from humans and other beings, he would slowly change and become more of a vampire than a human, and never did so. It was only now when an opportunity to become more powerful and finally have a way to track down his father presented itself that he acted. Ding! The host has drunk enough blood, and the requirements have been met. Does the host wish to evolve his bloodline now? The system has done a scan over the surrounding area, and no threat has been detected. The system urges the host to evolve the bloodline right now. Do it, Lyle said as he took a couple of steps to the side. He suddenly stopped, his eyes widened to their fullest as blood started flowing from them. His mouth, nose, and ears started bleeding as well as he fell down to his knees. He grit his teeth with all of his strength as an unimaginable pain assaulted him. His hands were clenched in fists and blood could be seen flowing from them as his nails dug deep inside the palms of his hands. Lyle felt as if his blood was boiling, and he wasn't exactly wrong. To evolve a bloodline meant that his body would completely change from the inside. The old blood would be completely removed from the body before it started. His skin cracked at multiple places as blood started flowing out, but the blood didn't fall down on the ground, it floated around Lyle and created a cocoon of blood around him. Soon, his entire body had been covered by the cocoon before he lost consciousness. Lyle felt as if he was floating in water. He couldn't move, he couldn't open his eyes, all that he could do was simply feel. The situation wasn't bad, but as time passed, Lyle felt tenser and tenser. He felt as if days, if not weeks had passed and yet he hadn't been able to move from the spot. Months passed by, and Lyle was still stuck, floating in the water as his body didn't listen to him. He tried shouting in frustration, but he couldn't. Even moving a finger was impossible. Years had passed and Lyle was peaceful, he had grown accustomed to the situation. His mind was blank as he simply tried not to think at all and sleep. It wasn't until 10 years had passed that Lyle finally opened his eyes. He looked around himself, only to find a sea of blood surrounding him. As for his body, it was on a large rock in the middle of the ocean of blood. On the rock was an altar from which blood continuously came out and went inside the sea of blood. It was as if the altar was what had created the sea. On top of the altar was a statue of a woman. Lyle didn't know why, but he felt drawn to the woman as if she was someone incredibly important to him. Suddenly the statue came alive, the woman opened her eyes and smiled warmly at Lyle. Her hair was as dark as the night sky, her eyes red as a rose, and her smile as warm as the sun. She reached out her hand at Lyle, who simply stared at her in awe. Just as her hand was about to touch him, his eyes constricted as he backed away. The woman looked at Lyle in confusion before giggling. An interesting one has appeared, this system doesn't seem bad at all, I will be waiting for you, little one, come and find me once you grow up. The woman spoke as she smiled at Lyle for one last time before everything turned black. The cocoon of blood in which Lyle had been standing inside shattered, and out came Lyle. His body was different compared to before, he was about 3 centimeters, 1.2 inches, taller, his hair had grown a bit longer and his body seemed a little bit more muscular. Most wouldn't be able to notice the difference, but Lyle could. It wasn't only his body that changed, it was his strength as well. It was gone. He felt as weak as he was back when he was still training to become an assassin. He could barely sense mana and his physical strength was miles away from what it previously was. Ding! Evolution has succeeded, the host has evolved his bloodline. Ding! The host has regressed from being a Tier 2, level 169 being to level 1. The host's bloodline has changed, Dilvico, Vampire Noble, Vampire Lord, Ding. The system has detected an anomaly during the evolution, traces of another powerful bloodline have influenced the evolution. Vampire Lord has changed to True Vampire Lord, I have actually become a Vampire Lord. Lyle thought to himself in shock as he had difficulty digesting the information. Vampire Lords were incredibly powerful beings in the world of Corleon, they were at the very top of the food chain and only the most powerful beings in Corleon were above them. In the vampire race, it was only the Empress of the Night, the ruler of all vampires that was above the lords. Lyle didn't just become a vampire lord, but something different, however. What the hell is a pure vampire lord? Ding! The system is unable to give information about the race, it is believed that the host might be the only being of the race currently existing, it is, however, certainly stronger compared to the race the host had previously evolved to. So, I didn't become a vampire lord, but something stronger. Correct, Ding. Thanks to the host's powerful bloodline, a class has been given to the host before reaching the class requirements, the class Blood Lord has been activated. Blood Lord, description. A being that controls blood and can use it to not only create things but even force other beings to obey him. Player has acquired 3 skills thanks to the class. Ding! The host has been marked by the Empress of the Night, it is advised that the host becomes powerful quickly in order to avoid being tracked down and captured. Ha! Chapter 14. The Empress and the System's Explanation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 14. The Empress and the System's Explanation. A woman opened her eyes as she sat on a silver throne. Her black hair flowed down to the floor and moved about, even though there was no wind present inside the throne hall. Interesting, a lord has been born, but not a normal one. The woman spoke as she glanced at a guard. Bring Lord Isaac to me. Yes, my Empress. The guard bowed before disappearing from the spot. Even though he was only a guard, he was one of the personal guards of the Empress and was a Tier 5 being. The woman leaned back against the throne and exhaled deeply as she felt the cold silver touching her body. First the system had arrived, and now a lord appears, how interesting. A mere 2 minutes later, the guard returned, but not alone. A man that wore a long black and gold robe was with him. His hair was slicked back and a symbol of a 3-headed snake could be seen on his neck. My Empress. Leave us. The Empress spoke as all the 5 guards that had been in the throne room all bowed down before disappearing from the spot. A new lord has appeared. Does the Empress wish for me to bring him to her? The man spoke as he looked at the eyes of the Empress. No, there will be no need for that, he is quite a weak one, it will take time for him to grow powerful enough to join us. I have called you for a different matter. Do you remember when you came back about 23 years ago when you begged me to help you and that woman from the pursuers of the Aratnal Empire? The man's eyes suddenly constricted as he stared at the Empress. His hands clenched into fists as memories of a distant past came to him. Back then, he thought he had matured, he thought that frivolous thoughts and actions done out of pure emotions were not possible for him. Yet a single glance at that woman made all of that shatter. He not only fell in love with a woman of a powerful noble clan, but he copulated with her and sired a child. He had done 2 grave offenses of the vampire clan and by all means, he should have been executed for it. But he still returned. He, a vampire that was close to becoming a lord, returned back home and begged the empress for help. He begged her to help the woman change her looks and to disguise her so that the noble clan would not be able to find her and the child that was growing in her belly. The empress, in his shock, accepted it with ease. She only asked for one thing. That he would stay in the castle and become her right-hand man. By all accounts, that should have been an honor, but it was far from it. Isaac was forced to sign a blood pact with the empress. He was not only bound to her, but under her complete control. Every request the empress had would be accepted by him, whether he liked it or not. Yes, I remember. Well, the new lord is your son, the very child that you and that woman had. I see, Isaac said in a calm manner as his hands shook a bit. That is all, you may leave, Isaac. The empress said as Isaac bowed down before leaving the throne room. Upon exiting the throne room and walking through the halls, he clenched both of his hands before slamming the wall to his left. The wall that had been created using magnetic stones that were mixed with monster bones and the dust and ashes of drakes and dragons was incredibly durable, and not even an archmage could destroy it. Yet a simple slam of the fist from Isaac was enough to not only crack a full 6 meters of the wall but also destroy the middle of it. My son, why couldn't you have lived a normal life? Isaac thought before continuing towards his room. In the throne room, the empress stared at the gate with amusement before giggling as she heard the wall break. Ah, Isaac, what will you do now? Come on, you have not disappointed me for 2 decades, let me have some more fun now as well, hee hee. The empress giggled again as she stared at the gate in infatuation. The empress has marked me, what the hell? Lyle shouted in a mix of fear and anger after hearing the words of the system. How, why would the empress, one of the most powerful creatures of Corleone, even care about me? The system suspects it is because of the host's bloodline. The empress might be able to sense the appearance of a powerful new bloodline on the planet. Why didn't you tell me that before the evolution then? The system was unaware that the bloodline evolution would cause a mutation and give birth to a unique bloodline. The host will be safe, however, as the system can sense that the empress and the host are divided by a large distance. The vampire's empire is on an entirely different continent. I guess you are right. Ding. The system will now explain the status screen and the changes it has brought to this world. Activating the host's status screen. Name. Lyle level. 1 to 0 soul power /200 class. Blood Lord, more info in the class menu, race. True Vampire Lord, more info in the race menu, attribute points. 0 strength. 8 agility. 10 endurance. 8 vitality. 8 willpower. 9 spirit. 12 strength. Improves the physical strength of the person and the muscles. It allows for more powerful attacks, carrying weight, and the strength and durability of the muscles. Agility. Improves the speed and reflexes of a person, allowing for faster movement, attacks, and coordination of the body. Endurance. Improves the toughness, natural defense, and resilience of the body, namely the toughness of the host's skin, muscles, and bones. Vitality. Improves the body's natural regeneration and the internal organs' toughness. Willpower. Improves the person's speed of thought and resilience against soul attacks. A mage will have a harder time learning new spells and casting spells without enough willpower spirit. Improves the person's capacity to mana gather and the strength of the soul. The more spirit the host has, the larger the mana reserve and the higher his sensitivity to mana will be. Skills. Active, 2. Blood Art, Blood Spear. The host will be able to manipulate blood into the shape of a spear with less mana cost and trouble compared to simply manipulating the blood into other shapes. The more mana and blood are used for the skill, the more powerful the spear will become. Vampiric Servitude. The host can use the power of a vampire lord to change a being into a vamp or a vampire. The being has to be near death or died recently in order for the skill to be used. The being will have unconditional loyalty to the host and will perform any task the host asks of it. The current limit of servants. 1 passive, 1. Blood sensitivity. The host will be able to sense blood in a radius of 30 meters around himself. The stronger the host becomes, the more powerful the passive skill will become. Ability. Blood manipulation, rank S, level 1. The host can manipulate blood in the surrounding 30 meters around himself. Blood from more powerful beings will be more difficult to manipulate, as is the blood that is still inside a living being. Ding! The system has arrived on the planet Corleon and most intelligent beings have been weakened while wild monsters have seen a boost in power. All the beings on the planet now have access to the system. The inhabitants of the planet no longer need to actively draw in mana in order to strengthen themselves and grow stronger. By simply defeating an enemy of a similar level, one will receive a portion of the defeated being's soul power which will strengthen the host. The system has finished the explanation. The host will now have access to the most basic functions. Farewell. The gentle voice that Lyle had been hearing until now suddenly vanished after the explanation. Lyle was, however, focused on staring at the status screen in front of him. He looked at his level, before staring at what level he was at. He had no idea how the entire thing worked, but he knew that compared to the previous him, he was much, much weaker, but his potential was larger. Alright, I first have to find my way back and give my report to the agent, Lyle said as he suddenly looked down. He only now realized that he had no clothes on and was standing naked in the middle of the forest. I have to find some clothes first. Chapter 15. Ilya's Wealth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 15. Ilya's Wealth. The player is unable to make the human called Ilya a servant as the difference in power is too large and the person has been dead for too long. Well, it was worth a shot, Lyle said as he put on the Archmage's robes on. He proceeded to dig a hole before burying the dead mage inside of it. If people find out he is dead, some might assume it was me who did it. Since my strength is nowhere near what it once was, I need to lay low for some time and increase my power again, Lyle said as he wiped the sweat from his face. Even though his stats were low, thanks to it still being nighttime, Lyle's strength was boosted and he could fight against stronger enemies without much trouble. Of course, most beings in the world were now stronger than him. I wanted to go back right away, but I should wait. The road back is long and dangerous for the current me. I should increase my strength first before trying to find a caravan that is heading to Orsvold. That will be the best course of action right now. Hey, system, you said that monsters have become more powerful, right? Lyle suddenly asked. Correct. I wonder if the weaklings in the forest have also become stronger. Maybe I can use them to regain some of my strength, Lyle said before smiling dangerously. He went to a nearby tree and broke off a branch before using his nails to sharpen it. His nails were quite sharp, even though he was only a level 1 being currently. They weren't sharper than blades, but he was still able to use them to sharpen wood, albeit with some difficulty. TCH, it took a while, but it's done, Lyle said as he stared at his hand. 2 of his fingers were bleeding, they were punctured by the wood during the sharpening process. Lyle closed his eyes and used his ability. He focused on the blood that was flowing out from his fingers before the blood started coagulating and the bleeding stopped. Good, I can still do the same things as before, albeit with more difficulty. Now, let's find some monsters. The city will probably be under lockdown until tomorrow. I should try and kill as many monsters as I can before going back there, Lyle said as he went deeper inside the forest. Lyle walked inside as he fiddled around with a ring that he was now wearing on his left index finger. It was the spatial ring that once belonged to Ilya. The old bastard had some good things inside the ring, but no weapons or armor. Well, I guess a mage really doesn't have any use for such things. The inside of the spatial ring was a full 100 square meters, 1076 square feet, in size. It was a top-notch spatial ring that only those in the top ranks of the Empire had. For Lyle, it was a reward for managing to kill the old Archmage during the system's integration with the planet. This amount of gold coins will be enough for me to use for a long time, I can get some good gear in the city right after they open up. It's a shame I can't sell the staves, wands, and tomes of this guy. His research is also worthless to me. Lyle thought as he glanced inside the ring. There wasn't only gold inside, precious gems could also be found, but the things that were worth the most were the many staves, wands, tomes, and the research papers of the old mage. All of these items were things that an archmage personally collected, and each was worth a small fortune, especially the research papers. There were also bottles of antidotes and poison inside, which could prove incredibly useful for Lyle in the future. The poison was definitely what Ilya had personally created, and they were incredibly deadly. The research papers and tomes were all very useful to any mage, even archmages. The research papers were on the art of poison and spatial magic, two elements that were amongst the hardest to master, and finding any data about them was very difficult. Lyle would be unable to try and sell them for a long time, however. If he was to show such items, even if he went to the most reputable auction houses in the Empire, there was the possibility of a powerful figure to try and find out his identity before attempting to kill him in order to check what else he might have. It would only be later when Lyle reached at least Tier 3, which was the same as the Gold Knight realm in the Empire, that he would be able to consider selling them. When it came to tiers, it only took Lyle a short period of time to get used to the system's way of calling them. Tier 1 would be the same as a normal knight, or as they were more commonly called, a bronze knight or bronze mage. Silver knight and silver mage would be the equivalent of Tier 2, gold knight and gold mage Tier 3, and titled knight or archmage Tier 4. There were higher ranks of power in the world, and Lyle knew them. Just like a vampire lord was usually a rank as well as a bloodline, it was the equivalent of Tier 6 for the system. Different races had different systems of power and what they called the corresponding ranks, but to the system, it was all divided into tiers. Lyle had no idea how many tiers there were, but he didn't care, for now, he was a being that wasn't even Tier 1, to think of more would be useless. Lyle only walked about 2 minutes before he heard sounds in the distance. He quickly went down and started going forward while crouching as he stared in front of him. Soon he was able to see what had made the sounds. Toskers. Lyle thought to himself as he stared at the 3 monsters in front of him. Each of the monsters was about 1.5 meters tall and had a head that was unusually large. The weird monsters stood on 2 legs, but they didn't have arms. Instead of that, there were 2 weird, tentacle-looking things that came out from their shoulders. Their heads were a mixture of a frog and a deer. They had no fur on their bodies as they were slimy all over. Their feet were similar to human feet but wider. Their small stomachs protruded out as the 3 monsters had finished eating. Toskers were not powerful monsters, they were usually a danger to normal people as they loved to ambush their unsuspecting victims before strangling them with their vines. Other than that, the monsters were quite weak. Their large heads made it so they couldn't run fast, and the 2 tentacles, although allowing for a wide array of attacks, were soft and easy to cut off. Toskers being here means that the river is nearby, or it could be the lake. No, the lake should be a bit deeper inside the forest, I am sure of that. Lyle said before focusing on the 3 monsters. They're bigger than normal, and those tentacles, they have small spikes all over them. That is definitely not how a normal Tosker looks like. Lyle thought before climbing on top of a nearby tree. Is this because of the system? Have monsters already started changing so quickly? Lyle thought before clenching the small wooden spear in his right hand. Toskers usually had normal tentacle-like arms that were soft and slimy. Their height was usually about 1.2 meters. I can take care of 1 easily, even killing 2 is not a problem. But I'm not sure about 3, I still know nothing about those spikes. If they are dangerous, then this might become dangerous, but I do doubt that, no matter how much a Tosker becomes powerful, they shouldn't have poison inside their bodies. Their stomachs are bloated, that means they have finished feeding recently. I can sense blood coming from their feet and on the ground, leading to the right. That's probably where the unfortunate victim is located at. Lyle quickly analyzed the situation as he stared around the Toskers. Their movement should be limited since they just fed. Taking care of these 3, shouldn't be a problem after all. Lyle concluded before waiting for the Toskers to get closer. He had intentionally gone up a tree that was on the way of the Toskers. They would have to pass next to the tree, and Lyle would take full advantage of that. He grabbed another branch, but he didn't break it off the tree, not yet. The wind blew and the sound of the leaves moving around was heard in the forest as the three monsters made sounds as they seemingly talked with each other. Suddenly, as they were walking underneath the tree where Lyle had climbed up on, they heard a snapping sound as a branch was broken. Looking up, the Toskers panicked as the silhouette of a person could be seen falling down on them. Chapter 16. First fight in the forest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bam! Lyle fell down from the tree and slammed the spear and branch in his hands into the skulls of two Toskers. The spear he had created managed to pierce into the soft skull of one of the Toskers, but it broke in the process. The branch, however, dealt a powerful blow to the top of the other Tosker's head and was still in one piece. Lyle immediately threw the broken piece of the spear at the third Tosker before jumping back and dodging 4 tentacles that attacked him. The Tosker whose head was impaled by the spear had managed to lash out against Lyle before stumbling around and falling on the ground dead. As for the other two, they were enraged and ready to fight. Well, at least the third Tosker who didn't suffer a concussion was. The broken piece of the spear had impaled itself in the bloated stomach of the monster, but the wound was not deep and the Tosker could fight. The second Tosker, although still awake and ready to fight, was visibly shaken from the blow. His steps were slow and his body was swaying a bit. Good, I can focus on dealing with the third one while this guy is still in shock from the blow. Lyle thought before moving. He was faster than the two Tosker who were relatively slow monsters thanks to their large heads. He attacked the third Tosker right after dodging 2 tentacles that were coming at him. The tentacles were slow and not a threat to him since the second one still hadn't recovered from the blow. The problem came after he reached the third one. The tentacles were faster and even though Lyle could follow their movement and predict where they would come from, his body was not fast enough to allow him to do what he wished to do. Damn it, I still haven't gotten used to the current state of my body. Lyle cursed before dodging back and glancing at the dead Tosker behind him. He suddenly ran back toward the second one before dodging to the side and grabbing the dead Tosker's body with his left hand. He jumped in the air before grabbing the broken spear and pulling it out of the head before doing a quick spin and kicking the corpse over to the second Tosker who quickly used his tentacles in order to protect himself. Lyle landed on the ground and immediately threw the broken spear at the third Tosker before charging at the second one. The tentacles of the second Tosker were entangled around the corpse he previously threw at him, which allowed Lyle to shorten the distance between them fairly easily. Upon reaching the Tosker, he quickly slammed the branch on top of its head. The branch snapped from the power of the blow while the Tosker leaned back from the hit, his tentacles entangling from the corpse and falling down on the ground as the monster had briefly lost control over its body. Lyle then used his claws. He stabbed the small, chubby neck of the Tosker before using his other hand to stab through the monster's eyes. A fountain of blood spurted out from the monster and covered Lyle, who used his ability to manipulate it. He immediately used one of his skills and formed a spear from the blood. Well, calling it a spear was more than generous as it looked like a thin piece of red matter that was being held in his right hand. The spear was about half a meter long, about 1.7 feet, and was only 4 millimeters thick, 0.06 inches. It looked incredibly frail and Lyle didn't doubt that fighting with the spear was impossible since one hit would be enough to snap it in half. But this was the best he could do with his ability in a hurry. He assumed a pose and pulled back his right arm before locking onto the final Tosker. One of the tentacles was severely injured as the broken spear he had thrown previously managed to pierce through it. Well, it pierced the left side and there was about 40% of the tentacle left at that location. Lyle spun his hips before throwing the blood spear with all of his might. The spear zoomed through the air before hitting the head of the Tosker. The Tosker had been unable to even use its tentacles to block the spear as it was simply too fast. Just like Lyle had thought, about half of the spear broke on impact, but it still penetrated deep enough. It wouldn't kill the Tosker, but it was close to doing so. Lyle smiled savagely as he stared at the Tosker before snapping his fingers. The spear suddenly shook before exploding and dealing the final blow. The part of the spear that had been lodged inside the Tosker's skull exploded and destroyed the brain, killing the monster. Phew! Lyle exhaled strongly before leaning against a tree and sliding down. His face was covered in sweat as he had used most of the mana he currently possessed to create the spear and make it explode. The explosion was a skill he had created by himself a long time ago, and one that he loved using the most as it allowed him to quickly kill any enemy he stabbed with his daggers. But that was the previous him, the him right now was so weak that he could only do it once. Ding! Skill, Blood Explosion, has been created. Blood Explosion, the host can use any blood that he has manipulated and cause it to explode. Oh, the system can do things like this, that's good, I don't have to worry whether my old tricks would work then, Lyle said before taking a deep breath. He wasn't only tired because of the large loss of mana, but because his stamina was depleted as well. Most people could fight such a battle and they would feel a little bit tired, but for some reason, even during the night when his stats were boosted, Lyle felt quite tired right now. The battle has been concluded. Collecting soul power. LVL4 Tosker killed, 40 soul power gained. LVL4 Tosker killed, 40 soul power gained. LVL5 Tosker killed, 50 soul power gained. The host has earned 130 soul power, so these guys were multiple levels above me. I wonder how much stronger one becomes after a level. Well, no better way to learn that than to level up myself, Lyle said as he stared at the canopy above him. I shouldn't just sit around, I need a weapon, Lyle said before getting up. Branches like the ones he used before wouldn't be enough for fighting against monsters, he needed thicker ones. Lyle spent the next 40 minutes looking for thicker branches before using his sharp nails to sharpen them. He even used his blood manipulation in order to cover his nails in blood before making the blood take shape of the nails. He focused on making the edges of the nail armor as sharp as possible before he started working. Even though doing that made him use more mana, it was a small amount and he had already recovered a bit. Lyle created a longer and thicker spear compared to before. He also used some vines he found and wrapped them around one part of the spear so that he can grip it better before using another vine to tie it on two ends of the spear so that he could holster it on his back. Lyle next found another thicker branch and cut it into two pieces, each being about 35 centimeters, 14 inches, long. He then spent most of the 40 minutes working on the two pieces. He created makeshift daggers, and just as he did for the spear, he wrapped vines on the handles of the daggers in order to have a better grip on them. Lyle nodded at his two new daggers as he spun them around. The two daggers were crude and simple, but they would be enough for now. If Lyle had his previous power, he could use such daggers to kill even bronze knights as he could wrap mana around them. With the measly amount of mana he had now, however, he was unable to even reinforce his body with it, much less to bring it outside and use it on his weapons. Against weak monsters that roamed the forest, however, it would be enough. He could use the spear to hit an enemy from long range or to fight an enemy that had the reach advantage over him. The daggers were his weapons of choice, however, as he was most familiar with them. Lyle's mana had replenished enough and he soon took off, ready to face off against more monsters before trying his luck in the city. The company of soldiers should have already taken full control over the castle and the lockdown should be lifted in the morning. Chapter 17. Being ambushed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Swish. A spear zoomed past two trees before lodging itself deep into the body of a wolf that had been running away from Lyle. 3 wolves were lying on the ground around Lyle as he panted heavily. His clothes were ripped apart and there were multiple wounds that could be seen on his body. Cuts, bruises, bite marks. Not all were from this group of wolves, of course. He had already fought against multiple groups of monsters before them. One was a group of Toskers he had come across after making his way to the river. The monsters were eating the body of a deer right next to the river, and Lyle used that to his advantage and managed to kill the monsters without much trouble. The trouble came after more Toskers suddenly came out of the river and attacked him. Lyle had to fight off multiple monsters that this time had ambushed him. He also fought against a group of goblins that he had come across. Seeing the goblins came as a shock to Lyle, as he knew for a fact that such monsters didn't exist in the forest, at least not this close to the city. Goblins, although very weak monsters, bred incredibly quickly, and if left alone, they would increase their numbers before you could guess it. They used human women, elves, and other females of other species in order to copulate. They could also copulate amongst themselves, but goblins generally disliked doing such things for two reasons. The first reason was the attraction. Goblins had similar tastes as humans did, they disliked the physical looks of the female goblins, and they only copulated with them when there was no other choice. The second reason was because of the strength of the offspring. Generally, when a goblin produces an offspring with a human or elf female, the offspring turns out to be more powerful than the parent. If the female in question was much stronger than the goblin, then the offspring had a chance to be born as an evolved goblin, becoming a hobgoblin straight away, or another higher species of goblin. Because of that, any time goblins were spotted near cities or villages, the Adventurers Guild, or the city guards and soldiers would quickly go to exterminate them. Since goblins were weak, exterminating them was relatively easy. One only needed to watch out and not get surrounded by much larger numbers, and they would be fine. The goblins were small, they were about 1 meter tall and were generally a bit stronger than 10-year-old children, but much more agile and faster. Dealing with one or two was easy, but goblins usually moved in groups. The one Lyle had come across was a group of 5 goblins. Lyle had to think hard about whether he wanted to fight them or not. Goblins were not a big deal, but there was always the possibility that more could be nearby, and even if not, if he got wounded while fighting them, he could be in trouble when it came to future fights in the forest. After thinking so hard, however, he suddenly remembered something. It was nighttime. Goblins usually never came out during nighttime. They didn't have good eyesight in the dark, not nearly as good as other monsters that roamed during the night. Smiling dangerously, he decided to fight. The battle started and Lyle managed to finish it quite quickly. He first went on a tree before jumping down on one of the goblins and stabbing through the poor bastard with his spear. He quickly pulled the spear out before throwing it at another goblin and drawing out his daggers. Instead of fighting the goblins at close range, he opted to throw both of the daggers at 2 of the goblins. Thanks to the darkness, none of the 2 managed to even see the daggers before they had gotten lodged inside their chest. For the final goblin, Lyle simply used hand combat. He came near the goblin and before the little critter could attack him, he used a low kick to sweep him off the ground. The kick, however, did even more than simply sweep. One of the goblin's legs was broken and the monster yelled out in pain after falling down. All of the goblins were immobilized in mere seconds. The rest was easy. Lyle simply went ahead and pulled out his spear from a goblin's chest before stabbing it in the throat. He then proceeded to do the same to all the other goblins before taking his daggers back. It was at this time that wolves appeared. 3 wolves came close to Lyle during the battle, but seeing his strength, none of the 3 wolves attacked him. They merely observed the battle and slightly moved closer and closer. It was only after Lyle had taken his 2 daggers back that they attacked. As Lyle was crouching in order to retrieve his second dagger, he felt the slight rustling of a bush and a breeze coming behind him. He quickly rolled forward and dodged a bite. Upon looking back and realizing that 2 wolves had appeared, he was fully alert and ready to fight. But he didn't know that there was a third one to his right. The wolf jumped at Lyle and slammed him down on the ground. Lyle quickly used the dagger in his hand to block a bite while trying to reach his second dagger that had fallen nearby. The wolf used its claws to claw at his chest and rip apart the robe. Luckily, Lyle managed to grab the second dagger and used it to stab deeply inside the throat of the wolf. Upon being stabbed, the wolf panicked and tried to get away. only to get stabbed by the other dagger that Lyle had. The dagger went deep inside the eye socket and the wolf fell down to the ground, dead. The danger hadn't ended as there were two more wolves that were coming after Lyle. Upon seeing the death of their brethren, the two wolves stared at Lyle whilst walking around him, each of the wolves in a different direction. Lyle didn't wait for them to attack first, he quickly threw the two daggers at them before reaching for his spear. One of the wolves got injured by the dagger, but it was not a deep wound and it would do little to stop it. The other wolf, however, managed to dodge the dagger and jumped straight at Lyle, who had already grabbed the spear. Lyle crouched before planting the spear down on the ground and aiming straight at the wolf. As the beast's frame came closer, it opened its mouth in order to bite Lyle, only to be stabbed through its mouth by the spear. The thick spear not only managed to penetrate through the body, but it didn't break, which was the best outcome for Lyle. He quickly shifted his weight before moving the spear and throwing the body of the wolf at the second one that had charged at him. The wolf managed to dodge the body and came in front of Lyle, biting his left leg. Lyle winced in pain before using his spear and stabbing down, only for the wolf to back off before jumping at him. The wolf had this time bitten his left shoulder and thrown him down on the ground. Using the spear in this situation was impossible, so Lyle let it go before his nails suddenly grew a bit longer. He quickly used his nails and stabbed the wolf through the right eye. The attack managed to deal great damage and the wolf immediately let go of Lyle, but Lyle wasn't ready to let it off the hook just yet. He quickly scrambled back up before lunging at the wolf and throwing it down. The wolf's large body cushioned its fall and it did pretty much no damage, but Lyle wasn't aiming at damaging it this way. He used his long and powerful nails and started clawing at the wolf, in a manner similar to how the first wolf had done to him. Lyle, however, targeted the neck. His nails were nowhere near as sharp and powerful as before, but it was enough. He did a couple of clawing motions before grabbing the neck with his left hand and holding it in place with all his strength. The wolf didn't stay idle during this time, however. It tried to bite his hands continuously while using its legs to attack. Numerous cuts appeared on Lyle's body as more of the robe got ripped apart. He didn't care, however. He even let the wolf bite his arm at the end as he pulled back his right arm and held his fingers together, forming a spear out of his hand. He suddenly thrust his arm down at the wolf's throat with incredible strength. Splurt. The hand penetrated through and a gallon of blood suddenly started flowing out of the throat, dyeing Lyle in blood once again. His hand had not only penetrated inside the throat, but it almost went through it completely. Lyle fell down on the dead wolf as he panted heavily before getting up. He immediately picked up his spear as having no weapons would be equal to suicide in the forest. As he crouched down and picked the spear up, he looked ahead of him, only to find a fourth wolf staring at him before turning around and running. Lyle's eyes turned bloodshot. If the wolf went away and called more of them over, they would trace his scent and would spend the whole night looking for him. He used all the mana he had. He pushed his body to its limits before pulling back his arms and then throwing the spear with everything he had. The spear zoomed through the air before hitting the wolf. The wolf fell down to the ground. The spear had penetrated through its stomach and even one of its legs. The wound was serious enough that the wolf would probably die soon, but Lyle wasn't going to wait. He quickly went and grabbed one of the daggers he had thrown previously before going to the wolf. He crouched down in front of it, his breath was heavy as he stared at the wolf that was panting. Lyle grabbed its head, his arm was shaking a bit, his body swaying as he not only used up all the mana and stamina he had, but had also lost quite some blood. He pulled back his hand before stabbing the wolf with his dagger. He then pulled it out and stabbed again, and again, and again. It was only after he could no longer sense a heartbeat that Lyle stopped. He got up and swayed before grabbing a nearby tree to stabilize himself. He pulled out the spear and went to retrieve the second dagger before moving away from the location. Bdnv. Chapter 18. Back to the river. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lyle dragged his injured body and slowly moved toward the city. There was still a lot of time before morning arrived, but at least he would be safer closer to it since there should be a lot fewer monsters present in that part of the forest. Lyle quickly brought up his status screen and checked it out as he stopped to get a breather. Name: Lyle. Level: 4 to 210/500 Soul Power Class. Blood Lord, more info in the class menu. Race: True Vampire Lord, more info in the race menu. Attribute points: 0 Strength, 10 Agility, 12 Endurance, 9 Vitality, 9 Willpower, 9 Spirit. 12. It's not a lot, but I do feel a bit stronger. I do wonder what becoming tier 1 will be. Back when I reached the realm of Bronze Knight I had become almost double stronger than before, and that was without adding in the ability to control mana better and sense it more. Lyle thought as he winced in pain while sitting on a fallen tree. The wounds he had received from the wolves were quite something. He had been hit a couple of times before that, but the wounds that he received from the Toskers and other monsters paled in comparison to what he received after being ambushed by the 3 wolves. I can't believe I got so careless. I was too focused on my victory to realize that I was being targeted and that one of them had gotten close to me. Damn it, if they had been any stronger, I might have lost my life back there. Lyle thought as he panted. The first thing he did was check out the old mage's ring. He hoped that he could find some healing potions inside of it, but unfortunately there were none. TCH, what kind of an archmage doesn't carry such important items with him? Lyle said in a low voice before getting up with some trouble. The wounds wouldn't kill him, not if he rested. He didn't even have enough mana to use his blood manipulation to stop the bleeding. If he was to get into a fight right now, he would need to end it fast and with little exertion, otherwise, the bleeding would become worse. Lyle changed his mind. Instead of going straight toward the city, he would first stop by the river. Even though he had encountered Toskers there previously, he had already killed a fair amount and no more should be present. He wanted to wash off the blood from his body. Even though the blood on his robes would still be there, at least his body would be clean. This wasn't because Lyle was a clean freak or anything like this, but simply because he wanted to minimize the smell of blood that was coming from him. Some monsters could sense him from far away if he was drenched in blood, and that would make it harder for him to get closer to the city without any fighting. Lyle remembered which way the river was. Even though he had been badly injured and his consciousness turned blurry after the fight, he still forced himself to stay awake and observed his surroundings. He decided to use the same path he used to get here as he was not just more familiar with it, but the risk was lower since he had already killed the monsters that were there. It took him a full 40 minutes to get to the river, which was quite long compared to before. He couldn't move fast and had to be cautious in order to not meet any monsters. His speed had thus dropped sharply and he had slowly moved toward the river before finally arriving there. The dense bushes and the trees gave him a lot of covers, as did the darkness present in the forest. But with all the blood on him, the stench would definitely attract monsters that were nearby. Lyle had to move fast. There were no monsters nearby, and the bodies of the Toskers he had previously slain were still present on the ground. They were all in the same state he had left them, which was a good sign since that meant that no monsters had come here to feast on their bodies. If other Toskers had been present, they would have at least put their brethren in the river, or if they were hungry, they would have eaten them. Lyle had even put some right on the bank of the river and their vines inside the river. Thanks to the moonlight that fell on the river, he was able to see the vines moving with the current, which was yet another good sign since that meant that no monster was present in the river, otherwise it would have pulled the dead Toskers in. Lyle always did things with a backup plan in his mind. He had intentionally left the bodies in such a way so he could quickly confirm whether something had visited the area or not. One never knew whether he needed to come back after all. For Lyle, it was a bit different. He knew he would probably pass by this place again, even if he hadn't gotten injured. Still, Lyle didn't plan on going straight to the river just yet. He picked up a nearby rock and threw it in the river, then another one, and another. The rocks were a cautionary test of Lyle's as he wanted to check whether something that perhaps didn't care for the small Toskers was inside, but it seemed there truly was nothing. Lyle then approached, his footsteps as silent as they could be. It was currently summer, and even if he got wet, the temperature at night was still warm enough and he would be fine. He first approached the river and stared deeply inside it. He was still not going to simply get in, he had had enough surprises for today. The river wasn't particularly deep, the deepest point was about 7.2 feet, meters, and there should be no large monsters inside, at least that was what he hoped. Lyle finally stepped inside the river. He went closer to the center until the water was at his knees. Then, Lyle quickly put his head below the river and opened his eyes, once again checking if there was anything there. The moonlight gave some light, but thanks to his night vision he could clearly see everything. There was nothing. The river was truly devoid of any monsters. Lyle then proceeded to get inside the river fully and quickly washed his body before getting back on the shore. There was no guarantee that nothing would swim to his location, so he wasn't about to risk staying in the river any longer than he needed to. His long red hair was completely wet and water droplets fell from its tips. Lyle's red eyes scanned the surrounding area before he started making his way back to the city. His current appearance was pitiful. The robe he wore was torn at numerous places and barely provided any cover. His chest was bare, his stomach, some parts of his legs, and about 40% of his body was visible right now. One thing that Lyle did notice when he went to the river was his hair. Usually, his hair would turn black during nighttime, but now it was completely red. Maybe it was because of the surprise he had after the system had appeared, but Lyle completely forgot about it. The hair becoming red was because of his bloodline evolution. As a true vampire lord, nighttime would improve his stats, but his physical body would no longer change. His hair and eyes were blood red, but Lyle could also control that and turn them black. That was thanks to the fact that a vampire lord wasn't just a being that could control blood, in fact, that was only true for a minority of them. Vampires were similar to humans in that regard, although most could sense blood from far away, only a few could actually manipulate and control it like Lyle. Turning into a vampire lord had given him another benefit, and that was the ability to use the element of darkness. That meant that he could now learn how to cast spells of the dark element, ones that were well known for their destructive power. He could also use the cover of darkness to blend in and make himself less visible. Compared to his ability to manipulate blood, however, it was weaker and needed more mana. The reason was simple, even though it was also an ability, it was currently locked. Lyle could only use a little bit of its power before he became stronger, only then would he gain access to the full power of the ability. The very notion of that made his blood boil. Controlling blood and darkness was a combination that was well known in the world as one of the most powerful beings could do it. The ruler of the vampires and the most powerful vampire in existence, the Empress of the Night. As Lyle went back into the forest and made his way to the city, he was unable to see a shadow appearing beneath the surface of the river. The Toskers he had left at the river bank was suddenly pulled in before disappearing into the river. Small waves were created by the movement of the monster that quickly ate the monsters before turning around and swimming upstream. Chapter 19. Back in the city. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lyle walked through the forest with steady steps. Most of the bleeding had now stopped since he had used his ability in order to coagulate the blood in order to stop the bleeding. His mana had replenished by a bit, and even though he was still nowhere to being back to his full strength, he had enough for a battle, if there was any. Lyle still didn't plan on fighting, even though he had mana and he had managed to stop his bleeding. Fighting again could worsen his injuries, something he definitely wanted to avoid right now. With the bleeding stopped and the blood from his body gone, Lyle was now more confident when it came to going through the forest and avoiding the monsters that inhabited it. His spear, even though it was still in one piece, had a few small cracks on it. Lyle figured that it could be used for a battle or two before it would break, a pity since he couldn't really stop to get a new branch and create another spear. It mattered little, however, as Lyle wasn't planning on fighting if he wasn't forced to. His gear was back in the city, and his outfit and daggers were in an inn he had checked into yesterday. He had paid for a whole week in the top room in advance. Lyle had luckily disguised himself when he tried to assassinate the Duke so that nobody would recognize him. His plan was to get caught before assassinating the Duke in his chambers. He didn't need his gear as it would simply be confiscated by the guards, and trying to find it after breaking out would have been a nightmare. To be even safer, Lyle made a simple magic formation in the room. It was one that was used to create the most basic of an illusion. The illusion was cast on a corner of the room where Lyle had removed the planks of the floor and hid his gear in. Even if the owners of the inn were to go into the room, they would find nothing out of the ordinary in it. He had also left the room by jumping out of the window. He made sure that nobody had seen him as he had already disguised himself at that point. His disguise, coupled with the fact that he was never seen leaving the room, should make the receptionist and the two owners of the inn believe that he was still in his room, sleeping. They would probably feel shocked to see him after he returned, but it was of little concern to Lyle, who was planning on switching inns right away. Lyle walked toward the city with slow steps. He didn't need to hurry since it would still take a while for the sun to rise. Avoiding any stray monsters was what he needed to do right now. Luck seemed to be on his side, as even after walking for about 2 hours, he hadn't come across any monster. It seems like the part closer to the city is still devoid of the monsters. Good, that makes it easier for me to go deeper in the forest to fight, not to mention that leaving the forest is now much easier for me. Lyle thought as he walked normally now. His mana was full once again and the bleeding had stopped completely. Lyle had used his ability a couple of times previously in order to stop it. After he finished coagulating the blood at all the places where he was bleeding, he once again looked for a river or pond. He didn't fully get in this time, however, but merely used his hand to wash off any blood that was present on his body. After about 30 more minutes of walking, Lyle could finally see the city. The gates were open. That was the most important part. Good, it seems that the commander had ordered for the lockdown to be lifted. This makes things much easier for me. Lyle thought as he finally left the forest. The city was still a bit away, and it took Lyle about 4 minutes to walk over to it. Halt! The guards yelled out as they stared at Lyle. The royal soldiers. Lyle thought as he stared at the soldiers that were guarding the gates. There were only 3 of them present, but even one was enough. Nobody would dare cause any trouble upon seeing the royal crest on their armor. "Who are you?" one of the soldiers said as he observed Lyle. His ragged appearance alarmed the soldiers as they could see claw and bite marks on his body. I'm a hunter, sir. I was in the forest and lost track of time. While I was returning, that voice rang inside my head. Monsters suddenly appeared and I almost died. Please, let me go in, I just want to rest. Lyle presented a distraught face as he went down on his knees. The lack of mana made the soldiers less wary of him. Lyle had used his ability to change the color of his eyes and hair into black, which was a lot less eye-catching than his usual red one. I can simply tell them the code so that they know I am the assassin they are working with, but that would put too much unwarranted attention on me. They will definitely escort me to the castle and interrogate me about Ilya and what had transpired in the castle. That will be my final resort. Lyle thought as he stared at the soldiers with teary eyes. Monsters appeared in the forest. One of the soldiers asked in shock as he stared at Lyle. "Why? Yes, sir, I don't know why. I was a bit deeper in the forest, but there had been no sighting for a while. Suddenly goblins, tuskers, wolves, all manners of monsters had appeared inside. I barely managed to survive," Lyle said as he pointed to his wounds. The wounds had started bleeding once again, and Lyle had even manipulated the blood to flow out more and cover a good portion of his body. If he had simply arrived without any bleeding, the soldiers would have definitely become suspicious of him. The soldiers glanced at each other before one nodded and approached Lyle. "It's all right, you can go in, but first, take this and smear it on your wounds. It should stop the bleeding," the soldier said as he gave Lyle a small bottle of what looked to be a balm. Healing balm, how nice of you," Lyle thought as he took the balm from the soldier's hands before opening it. His hands trembled a bit as he applied the balm to his injuries, faking being in pain to make them less wary of him and to cause more sympathy from them. "Can you walk? Do you need any help in getting back home?" one of the soldiers asked as he looked at Lyle with slight concern. "You don't need to be shy, the information you have given us about the forest changing is valuable, this is the least we can do," another soldier said before Lyle shook his head. "No, I will be fine, sirs, this bottle you have given me is more than enough, thank you," Lyle said as he stared at them with tears falling down his face before bowing slightly to the soldiers that looked to be a bit uncomfortable. "It's all right, please, get in, go and get some rest," a soldier said before urging Lyle to get inside. Lyle bowed once again as he entered the city before walking towards the inn. He first made sure that the soldiers were not following him before going in a roundabout way and finally reaching the inn. A lot of people had been woken up by the mage when he had shouted about the Duke's death, which made people panic. Most were still up, but they luckily stayed in their houses. Lyle approached the inn before looking around and jumping on a nearby house. He quickly started climbing up on roofs before jumping on top of the inn. He scaled the wall down before entering his room through the open window. Everything is still the same, good. Lyle thought as he looked around the room, it seemed that nobody had entered it after he had left. He first entered the bathroom. There was a shower installed inside, a couple of large barrels of water were placed on the roof of the inn and small formations that drew in heat were created on the bottom of them. Thanks to that, the last 2 floors of the inn, where the best rooms were located in, had access to warm water. Lyle took a quick shower before drying himself with a towel. He then took some of the clothes he had left in the room and lay down on the bed. The night had been full of surprises and he almost lost his life twice. The arrival of the system would without a doubt cause great turmoil in the world, but for Lyle, it was a chance to rise up and become more powerful than he had ever dreamed of. With those thoughts in his mind, he closed his eyes before falling asleep.